All right, class, this is going to be a short video to help you typically in the second week of the course and really throughout the entire course. One of the toughest topics the students mention is base number systems besides base 10. We're all familiar with base 10 because that's the number system that we use. But when you start looking at a base 5 number, base 6 number, base 11 number, base 12 number, then it can get very confusing for students. In homework 3, question 4, there are some questions that they give you a number in a particular different base besides base 10. And the directions ask you to find the numeral preceding and succeeding each of the following numerals. So like say if we were in base 10 and you were given the number 36, then you know that 35 would be the preceding numeral and 37 would be the succeeding numeral. That's easy enough for us to do because we can easily subtract 1 and add 1 and get our answers. But that's the number system that we're familiar with. So essentially, that's what you're going to want to be doing, but in the different number systems. In order to help you make sense out of this, I'm going to first start you out with an example where we're going to assume base 10. So let's assume that this number is actually base 10, what we're used to. And of course, to find the preceding term, we're going to subtract 1. But what I want y'all to notice is the whole borrowing procedure that I do and how I change the numbers once I borrow. All right. If you recall from the base 10 number system, the digits that we use are 0, 1, ... with 9 being the largest single digit we use. Okay. All right. So what that means is when I go over here to in this far right side and I try to subtract 1 from 0, I can't do that because 0 is the lowest digit on the scale. So that means I have to borrow from the 4, which is really a 40. And when I borrow from that, it's going to make this number a 10. And it's going to now take away the 4 and become a 3. Because basically the 3 is like a 30 plus the 10 is the 40. I've just borrowed it. I've redistributed the number 40. So that allows me now to go 10 minus 1 and get the 9. But now it will be a 3 that I bring down and then the 9. And it makes sense that 939 would be the number that's the preceding numeral to 940. Of course, easy to take 940 plus 1 and then just get 941. That's not the hard part. In this case, subtracting is a lot harder. So then what I want you to look at is, okay, now let's look at a number, say, T30, which is a, let's assume that's a base 11 number. And of course, the digits in base 11 go 0, 1, all the way up to a T, which the instructions will tell you that that's the digit for a 10. It will also tell you to use an E for 11 when you get to these higher base numbers. Okay, so if I have to now subtract 1 to get the preceding term, then I realize I'm in the same situation I was before. I can't take away 1 from 0 because 1 is bigger than 0. But now what I'm going to actually do is borrow from the 3, but remember I'm borrowing now an 11 rather than a 10. So this is going to drop to a 2, but now remember this becomes not a 10 but an 11. So I now do 11 minus 1, which is 10, and I have a digit now for a 10, that's a T. And then I just bring down 2 and bring down the T, and so my preceding term would be a T, 2T, and that of course is a base 11 number. If you had to go to the succeeding term, that will not be hard in this case, because if you take T30 plus a 1, then we're actually allowed to add a 0 and a 1. There's not a problem there. So that gives us a 1, bring down the 3, and bring down the T. So that this would be the preceding number to T30, and this would be the succeeding numeral from T30. All right, it's tricky stuff. Okay, Let's look at another example. And again, I like to first start you out and remind you what happens in base 10, since that's familiar to us. So let's assume this is just a regular base 10 number, but let's go for that preceding term again. Well, remember, we cannot do 0 minus 1. 1's too big. So that means I'm going to borrow, but when I borrow, and I'll make this a 10 once I borrow, but when I borrow, I'm changing a 0 to a 9, but yet 0 was lower than a 9. So that means I really borrowed from here, and I really borrowed from here, and I really borrowed from here, and I really borrowed from that, which basically makes that a 0 now. So what that means is now I can do over here on the far right, 10 minus 1 is 9, but now bring down the 9, the 9, the 9, and the 9, and that, of course, would be the preceding numeral to the number 100,000. And that makes sense. We know that 99,999 is the number that comes before. To get the succeeding number, that's not hard. You just add and get 100,001. In this case, the subtraction's a lot harder. Okay, so let's look at something similar, but now let's assume that we have the same number, but now this number is in base 12. And as you want to remember, the digits in base 12 go 0, 1, all the way up to a digit for 11, and they will tell you that that's going to be an E. Okay. All right. So once again, when we're going to subtract 1 to get the preceding numeral, we can't do 0 minus 1, so we're going to borrow. But remember, when we borrow, then we need to remember that when I drop this down by 1, see, when we're in the base 10 number system, that drops down to a 9. But when we're in the base 12 system, this is now going to change this into a number 11. And when I borrow it, it makes this a 12. All right. Back in the base 10 system, it makes it a 10, and you do 10 minus 1. In the base 12 system, it makes it a 12. And when you drop it down, it doesn't drop down to a 9, it drops down to an 11. Well, that meant that since a 0 became an 11, you must have borrowed from here. That drops that down to an 11, which means that drops that down to an 11, which means this drops this down to an 11, and that's gone. So that now you come over here to the far right and do 12 minus 1, which is 11, and that's going to be an E. And all of these other numbers can just be brought down. And you see that the preceding numeral in the base 12 number system is this number right here. If you added a 1, that would be easy. It would just be 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, but in the base 12 system. So what you're going to find on this particular question is either the subtraction or the addition is going to be the hard part, one or the other. The other one part will be easy. And so far what you've seen is that the subtraction is the trickier operation, and that addition actually looks pretty easy and looks very similar to what we're used to in base 10. Now there will be one at the end, however, that's trickier doing the addition rather than the subtraction. So let's take a look at that. And so let's look at the number 5, 5, 5, but this is in base 6. And so if you remember the base 6 digits, that goes 0, 1, all the way up to a 5. Okay. All right. So, and remember that once you finish with a 5, really the next number up would be a 10, 11, all the way until you get to a 15, and then it goes up to 20, and you would know this, just by getting familiar with the base 6 numbers. All right. So now when I subtract a 1, this is not going to be the hard operation this time because I don't need to borrow. 5 minus 1 is 4. That's a legitimate digit in the base 6 number system. And I didn't have to borrow, so that just means I bring this down, and this is my preceding numeral to the 555 in the base 6 number system. What is going to be harder now is the addition, and here's why. Because if I add the 1 now, 5 plus 1 is 6. Well, that wouldn't be any big deal if we were in the base 10 number system, but we're in the base 6 number system. And so the number 6, the digit 6 doesn't exist. the digit 6 is really a 10. So what you have to realize is that means I'm going to put the 0 and carry the 1, and I'm back to 1 plus 5 is another 6. But remember, the number 6 is really a 10. So you put the 0, carry the 1, and 5 plus 1 is another 6. But remember, 6 is actually a 10. And so therefore, this would be the succeeding numeral to the 555 in the base 6 number system. So this is some tricky stuff. I hope I just showing you a few examples like that this will make it a little bit easier. If you really are struggling, you might want to reach out to some tutoring, or of course, feel free to send me a message, either questions to instructor or your individual forum, and just let me know if you're still having trouble and what you're having trouble with, and I'll try to create some more examples for you.